The markets are, by historical metrics, around 200% over historical average valuation. They won't stay there. And so one of my big concerns is that we could easily witness a 60, 70, even an 80% correction at some point. My concern is that it won't be quick. My concern is that it will be protracted, which means you'll burn the clock, and that'll kill a lot of investors. And right now there's an optimism in part of the country, but there's still a lot of stresses. And normally at market tops, everyone's euphoric, and I wouldn't call us euphoric. The Trump supporters are euphoric, but there's another 150 million people who are not Trump supporters. So what's the bottom going to look like societally? And I think it'd be a real problem.
Hello everyone and welcome to another edition of CEO and Market Expert Interviews. I'm your host Lucian. Most of you know me as Triangle Investor from social media. My guest today is Professor of Chemistry at Cornell University, a great guest to talk about geopolitics, financial markets and commodities. Mr. Dave Collum, welcome to my show. It is great to have you here.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
We are living in an era of seismic shifts in geopolitics, so I want to start with that. I would like to hear your opinion on the geopolitical mess that we have in the world. What are your views on Trump's first almost 30 days of presidency, and what geopolitical aspects do you believe he will be successful in, and which aspects he will be less successful in your opinion?
Well, he had a spectacular opening. I thought he was going to hit the ground running, and I thought there'd be fireworks, but he was 10 times more than I expected. He just carpet bombed the world with stuff, and so I'm finding it very, very entertaining. I think most of his decisions are pretty good. Some of them will cause a lot of collateral damage, and they'll have to clean up that mess. But the way I view it is that if you do big change, you're going to get collateral damage, and if you do big change with big sweeping proclamations, you're going to get even more. So I got to figure we got to get out the dustpan and the broom and clean up the mess at some point. But I had a discussion with a friend who's very left of center, unlike me, and he kept saying, well, this is Congress's job. And I said, Congress has had 2.5 centuries to fix it, and they haven't, so I'm willing to let him just go nuts for a while. I'm a little nervous when the other side gets a hold of the presidency, and we've redefined how it works. It's a fundamental sea change in the way the U.S. presidency exists, so it could get dicey.
Yeah. Okay, if we move Trump aside, what other major events you believe will happen in 2025 on the geopolitical front, and how fast is the sphere of interest changing in the world?
Well, I've been intrigued by Ukraine since 2014, and I think it was probably triggered by the overthrow. And I kind of casually watched it, and then 2022 showed up, and I dug into it deeply. And I don't know your audience, but my conclusion was, digging through, the writings of about 50 or 60 people who I trust, that NATO was the problem and Putin was just giving his best response that he had. I think Putin would have loved to have avoided the war, and NATO gave him no choice. And so I blame NATO. There are plenty of people in the United States who find that appalling, and they'll just have to get a life, I guess. And I believe that Putin wants to end the war. I believe that Trump wants to end the war quickly, and I believe that Zelensky must be having a cow trying to figure out his role after all the negotiations are done, because I think they're only including him out of courtesy. I don't think he has a say in the outcome. I think he's a puppet at this point. And whether the European wing of NATO actually has a lot of say is up in the air to me too, because the United States swings a pretty big stick. So my guess is that that Putin has the strong hand, and that because Trump wants it over, and I think Trump could say to Putin, what do you want? Here's what we want, and end it very quickly. My guess is Putin will end up with a big chunk of Ukraine. There'll be another chunk of Ukraine that will not be in NATO, and I'm guessing in the deal, under the auspices of rebuilding Ukraine, we will cut some pretty good economic deals with Russia to, bring energy, bring resources, bring whatever. And it has the potential of being win-win for the United States and Russia. I'm not sure about Europe. But I'm guessing Trump does not want this to fail. So I think Putin has a strong hand.
Yeah, when you mention Europe, the message we are hearing from Munich is a call for stronger, competitive Europe and increased military spending in the region. That is actually pressure coming from Washington. Do you see a stronger Europe or a weaker Europe going forward?
Well, that's rhetoric coming from Washington. I'm not sure it's actually pressure. I think they're saying it's your problem, not ours, and I'm not sure that's pressure. And again, I'm just winging it, right? I'm just a guy on the internet trying to read stuff and make sense of it. Did you see that little blurb from 60 Minutes where they talked about the complete loss of free speech in Europe?
Yeah.
At first I didn't pay attention, then I actually watched it this morning. It was horrifying. So Europe probably has a lot of work ahead of themselves to just get their own act together without having to worry about Ukraine. That's my guess.
Just one other geopolitical question regarding Trump. Trump has declared BRICS as dead. This comes just months after repeatedly threatening 100% tariffs on its members over de-dollarization efforts. What do you think of that? And what do you think of the Trump-BRICS relation? And how do you actually see the format of BRICS going forward?
Well, I don't think BRICS is dead. That's my guess. I had a long talk with Steve Hanke, who's a currency expert, and therefore his default setting is likely to go to currency. This probably lasted 2 hours. I don't know. But I said to him, tell me if I'm wrong, but I don't think BRICS is about a currency. I think BRICS is about alliances. And there's the handful of countries that were not even associated with each other beyond just some Wall Street guy associating them. But now there's an alliance, and one podcaster asked me, what do you think will come of the fact that they met in Moscow, 25 countries, and what do you make of that? And I said, well, since we've demonized Moscow and they met in Moscow, they're making a pretty clear statement that they don't care. And so I think BRICS, in 4 years we could have a new president. We will have a new president. And so if I were trying to piece together a BRICS alliance, I would not be that short-sighted as to say, well, now we're fine. I don't think that'll be the case.
Yeah, I had Steve Hanke actually in my show a few days ago, and
what did he say? What did he say? What did he say?
You will have to look at the interview. It was a 40-minute interview. We covered a lot.
I will.
Yeah,
I will.
Yeah.
I will.
Professor, what's your take on the financial markets? How will the financial markets perform in this kind of environment? Actually, my main question, how do you see the financial markets short-term and long-term?
Short-term I don't care about, because short-term. I'm an outlier in the sense that everyone's euphoric about how great everything's going to be for the economy. The problem that we face is we have a huge debt, and I don't see where that's going to go away. We have huge unfunded liabilities, 250 trillion unfunded liabilities. The consumer, I think, is in trouble, and the markets are, by historical metrics, around 200% over historical average valuation. They won't stay there, and so. One of my big concerns is that we could easily witness a 60, 70, even an 80% correction at some point. My concern is that it won't be quick. My concern is that it will be protracted, which means you'll burn the clock, and that'll kill a lot of investors. And right now there's an optimism in part of the country, but there's still a lot of stresses. And normally at market tops, everyone's euphoric, and I wouldn't call us euphoric. The Trump supporters are euphoric, but there's another 150 million people who are not Trump supporters. So,
Yeah.
so what's the bottom going to look like societally? And I think it'd be a real problem. So, but I don't see it as avoidable. To me, it's arithmetic. It's not projecting GDP collapse or anything. It's just saying to regress to the mean is going to take an incredible amount of pain.
Yeah, agreed, and agreed on the fact that the market is really overvalued at the moment. Professor, U.S. inflation increased by more than expected last month. The rise comes weeks after the U.S. central banks decided to hold interest rates, saying there was significantly there was a significant uncertainty about where the economy might be headed. My question to you is, where is the economy headed actually, and will the inflation numbers persist, or we could see some decline this year, 2025?
I hate predicting declines because you never know when they're going to appear. So,
Yes.
I don't know. I continue to be shocked that the market's all. I thought the markets were going to be collapsing in '06, and then in '07, I told my class they were going to collapse, and then it just takes a long time. It's like if you put a big block of ice out in the hot sun, it will melt, but it's not going to melt right away, and so it'll take the markets a while. I do believe that this might be the downturn for which you not only regress to the mean, but don't bounce back to overvaluation, which is what they've done for 40 years. So 30 years. 30 years has been the big problem. 40 years has been a pretty serious problem. So if the V bounces are dead, then we've got to regress to the mean about 70%, and then we've got to stay there. Right? It's not a correction if you bounce back up if you bounce back and recover the stupid valuation. So I think we're going to do that. I think the best model would probably be maybe the U.S. 1967 to 81, where they lost 70% inflation adjusted over 14 years. 14 years was painful. Or the Nikkei, which is inflation adjusted still underwater after 35 years. And so I think it's quite possible that I'm going to go to my grave with the markets not yet having returned to the mean, returned to current pricing, inflation adjusted.
Well said. What do you think are the commodities big winners or losers from this trade war we have right now?
That's a tough question because if there's a liquidity crunch of some kind, which there really ought to be, then that would hurt the commodities. At the same time, price relative to other things, they look okay. But I'm really reluctant to use, one of the most famous metrics of valuation is to look at the equity market versus the bond market. Well, the bond market was at a 5,000-year bubble. And so if you're going to use a 5,000-year bubble as your benchmark, you're going to get it wrong. And I think we're about to discover why. My nightmare scenario over the last 15 years has been bond prices go down, interest rates go up, and equity prices go down simultaneously, so that in all previous corrections that didn't correct anything, the bond market saved us because we went from 16% down to 0% very methodically. That game's over. Inflation is now very real. It was always there, but now it's headline real. And now you've got people saying, look, I don't care whether you say inflation's 3%. It's not 3% at my grocery store. It's not 3% on my insurance rates. It's not. So if you assume that inflation is maybe 2 times what the reported numbers are, which is a pretty easy case to make, then inflation's running wild. And the Fed might pretend to believe the CPI numbers, but I pray they're not that stupid. I'm hoping those guys are smart, and I'm hoping they're just liars. Because if they're that stupid, we're in real trouble. They've got a problem, and maybe they're lying because they want us to not think there's inflation while they inflate away the debt. But by the way, here's one for you. Can you name a country that inflated away its debt.
Probably some country that ended up in war.
Right. And then they don't end up inflating it away, they end up defaulting. So it's very hard to find one that actually inflated it away where you just say, okay, you know, after 10 or 15 years of bad inflation, they were back to stable ground. At the end, there's usually a default.
Yeah. Yeah. What about hedge against inflation? We all know, we are all saying gold, precious metals, silver. Okay. How do you see future of gold? Could we see some new form of monetary system similar to gold standard? Or even could we see gold becoming the only currency? I know it's maybe not possible right now, but...
Well, let's say gold re-enters the currency game, right? Right now, it's really just it really is kind of a speculative asset still, because the price we pay at the store is not correlated with gold. Everyone says, oh, you know, it's not gold going up and down; it's the dollar going up and down. I go, not if you go to the grocery store. If gold goes up 10% this week, the prices don't go down 10% in the grocery store. So we're still on the dollar currency standard, not on gold. I could imagine a scenario where varying degrees of gold backing are involved, and I could even imagine a thing where you say, okay, the such and such a currency is weak because it's not well backed, and such is strong because it's very well backed. You know, that sort of thing. I could imagine going back to one of these sort of pseudo gold standards where supposedly your currency is backed by gold. I could imagine we have a calamity, it could become a pure gold standard, right? Like in Zimbabwe, they reached a point where you literally had to use gold dust to buy stuff in the marketplace and stuff like that. So, or dollars, but so.
Yeah, what's your take on gold miners? Are they a good buy right now?
Oh. I have friends who are so smart and so knowledgeable about this area, but gold miners rip your soul out more often than they don't. And I own some, but if you actually look at it as a percentage of my net worth, it's a token gesture. If you look at what the miners did from what it was 01 to you track gold from the 256 low in 01ish to the $1,900 high down to around 1,200. It stabilized for a while. A 256 to 1,200 conversion is a pretty good return. The miners gave it all back, and I go, those guys don't know how to make money. And so I follow guys like Bill Fleckenstein and Fred Hickey, and these are smart guys. They talk about how the miners are cheap, but I go, but they have to be able to make money. And somehow they always seem to be a promise away from making money. and then you go to look at their valuations, you don't find gold miners with a PE of 6. You find gold miners with a PE of 30 in which they talk about how some mine is going to be in great shape. And so there's always a big extrapolation between the current state of the miners and real profit. And I don't want real profit just because the price of the miner goes up. I at this point want to buy things that make money.
Yeah. Do you hold any silver miners or silver as a physical commodity?
I own some silver, nowhere near as much as gold, although it's, I guess if I had to do the math on the silver, I probably have a couple annual salaries worth of silver to calibrate the listener. I own some Pan American silver. That's just a historical residue from when I was willing to buy miners. I will probably buy miners again. I own a couple of platinum miners, truly trivial amount. And the problem is they're in South Africa. And South Africa could become a failed state so quickly. And investing in failed states is a bad idea. And then, of course, there's platinum in Russia, right? That's another big source, Ukraine. But those are problematic areas. And so I think if I do platinum, I think I'm going to skip the miners and go straight to the metal, which has been dead money for about 8 years. It's been flatter than a pancake. And I'm watching it for a flicker. As soon as there's a pulse, I will start to push some chips in. I've got a tiny little bit, but it's not even worth talking about.
Yeah. What about silver manipulation? Are you one of those that believes that silver is manipulated? Do you believe in that or no?
Well, I believe that any asset that's traded on Wall Street is manipulated.
Okay.
So, I mean, yeah, of course they're manipulated, but is it manipulated for some geopolitical reason? Probably, I probably don't subscribe to that. Is it manipulated because you got traders who are making money by knowing where the bid stack is and things like that? Yeah, probably. Could there be big banks in big trouble because they've got it short and there's some default at the COMEX coming?
Yeah, that's what I meant actually.
I've been hearing stories like that for 25 years, and they've yet to crystallize. And so I'm sort of optimistic. It's like it's like a dog waiting for its owner to come home, and here's a car that lifts its head up, and then it goes back to sleep. So this story about gold and the gold racing from London to the COMEX. It's great headlines, but it did it in 2020 also, and I don't know, I don't remember anything dramatic then. During the COVID lockdown, all of a sudden a ton of gold showed up at the COMEX. I don't quite know why. And so, and I'm not even positive the gold isn't moving east instead of west. There could be a cover story here. I do think that I'm comfortable owning a lot of gold, which I have. I'm comfortable owning a lot of gold.
Agreed. What's your take on Bitcoin, on cryptocurrencies?
Oh boy, you're going to get me in trouble with all the Bitcoiners. I do not own it. I understand why people like it. There's several things I worry about. What keeps me out of Bitcoin? I actually looked at it at $10 a coin and said no. That doesn't stop me from buying it, but and I wouldn't. It doesn't make a big difference because if it had gone to 50, I would have sold it. Said, oh, that's a quick. I'll just take the profit. These guys are nuts, right? Bitcoin could do okay. What I see ahead of them are geopolitical risk, where I have this model that so supposedly Bitcoin started from a NSA paper written by 3 NSA guys describing a cryptocurrency back in the 90s. That's an inauspicious start for something that supposedly is a libertarian's commodity, and when the NSA is inventing it, you should pay attention. I wouldn't be shocked if they said, "Look, we're heading for a digital currency. Let's release the idea. Let's let the smartest guys in the world debug the system. Let's get them to set up the networks and get acclimated, and then when the time comes, we'll say, okay, you've had your fun. We'll take it from here." And they might make a lot of money in the process, but I think the normalization of Bitcoin is not its strength, because I think they will be told, okay, it's like a guy who starts a company, right? Some small 20-man startup, and then you have to hire a real CEO. Next thing you know, they say, we don't need you anymore. And so there's that. The other thing is, it's hard to imagine that the sovereigns are going to give up control of currency to Bitcoin. So Bitcoin could stay a tradable asset, but it's not going to become the global currency without a serious fight. Then lastly, Bitcoin's never been through a serious global economic downturn. So back in 0809, Bitcoin was not on radar. And so whenever I say it to Bitcoin, I say, oh, we've had 80% drawdown, blah, blah. I go, that's not what I'm talking about. I am talking about a global liquidity crunch where everyone's, where they're canceling people's credit cards because they don't want the exposure, that sort of thing, like in 0809. I think one of those is coming, and we've never seen how Bitcoin responds. So that'll be fascinating in the very least.
Yeah. Professor, final thoughts. I want to pick your brain on the real estate. We have a lot of red flags in the real estate sector. How do you see that?
The first thing that baffled me was in 0809 when the inventory all hit the market, and I was a little baffled. After a couple of years, I go, where did the inventory go? And And it turns out where it went was private equity and various groups like that buying it up with capital that was totally non-free market based cheap. So BlackRock was borrowing money at something like 0.15%. I'd never lend money to BlackRock for 0.15%. So clearly that's a scam, that's a grift, that's a graft. But now there's all these single-family dwellings all over the country that are in the hands of wealthy speculators who have maybe vast margin, maybe, and at some point this what turns out to be a terrible business. Renting whole houses is way for thin profit margin, and you make that up using huge amounts of leverage and getting huge volume of these things, because it's normally renting a single-family house is not a profitable thing. And then you got all the Airbnbs, and these guys all thought they're going to get rich, and now you've got a real estate crash going on in D.C. because they're going to fire everyone who lives in D.C. You got commercial real estate, which looks unavoidably like it's going to be in trouble for a very long time. And what do you do with a 50-story office building in the middle of a city that's unrentable? What do you do with that? In fact, I have this theory that the illegal immigrants who were put in there at $300, $400, $500 a night, that was actually a commercial real estate bailout. If you think about it, say, oh, we got trouble, okay, we'll put immigrants in there, we'll just hand over huge amounts of money to our real estate buddies who will kick back some to our campaign, and blah, blah, blah. You get the idea. So I think commercial real estate's in big trouble. I think with what's the 30-year mortgage on the U.S.? I'm like 7%. So they used to say that the market was strong, and I'd say, no, it wasn't. It's broken. It's not strong. It's broken. There's no houses moving. There's no sales. There's no nothing, because you're not going to sell a house that has a 2.5% mortgage and then replace with a house that has a 7%.
Yeah.
And so you can't sell, and you can't sell. And then what happens is, sort of in the spirit of something like Melody Wright might say, is you're going to go from no sellers to sellers who are under some stress, second homes, got to move, got to get a new job, get fired from USAID, whatever, to distressed sellers where just sell it at any price. I have actually a small piece of property I decided to put on the market, hoping that I didn't wait too long. It's a sliver, but it's a time to liquidate it if I can. I think we're going to have a real estate problem. And I think people who say real estate's strong are missing the point that no, real estate's tight because it's broken.
Yeah. Professor Collum, thank you very much for coming to my show. Great chat, and I look forward to host you again.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure.